So we'll start by setting our motivation. So we bring to mind the fact that we are here to continue familiarizing our mind with the wisdom that's contained in the Lamrim, the stages of the path to enlightenment. This manual that's given to us by great masters of the past like Lama Tsongkhapa, here explained by Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche. This incredibly clear, powerful way of understanding, of unlocking the Buddha's teachings in the sutras. And the purpose of the Buddha's teachings is to lead all sentient beings into enlightenment. And the reason to achieve enlightenment is to be of benefit to sentient beings, to ourselves contribute to the process of enlightening sentient beings. So on the basis of our confidence in the Buddha and his teachings, in that community of practitioners who deeply understand his teachings, we recognize them as objects of refuge. And we cultivate the mind of bodhicitta, seeking the fruit of the path, not for our own benefit, but again, to be of limitless benefit to others. So we generate those minds of faith and refuge in bodhicitta as our motivation. All right. So we would be beginning today with the contemplation on day 334. Is there any thing that we talked about last time to look at before moving on? So in a way, day 334 is introducing the perfection of concentration. So slightly different. The quotation and the commentary are a little bit different. The quotation says the supremely compassionate outlook of bodhicitta is a direct result of clear insight into our own essential reality and the reality of others. So here, so clear insight is what essentially Lama Yeshe is kind of correlating insight and how it leads to bodhicitta, recognizing that, bodhicitta isn't something that a person has to arbitrarily, train in or develop, provided that they deeply understand the existential condition that oneself is in and all other sentient beings are in. It flows naturally once we recognize that ordinary sentient beings such as ourselves are under the influence of karma and affliction, and that as long as that remains true, the only option is suffering. The only option is rebirth within cyclic existence, within, the desire realm, and then sometimes based on creating special causes and conditions, the form realm or the formless realm, but generally the desire realm, and all of those experiences are conditioned by dissatisfaction. And all we need to do is deeply understand that, and then the wish to be free of that would strongly arise in the mind for oneself and for others. And so, once we recognize that, that is true, and that part of this idea of essential reality also, which he mentions, also includes, reality as a whole includes that aspect of reality. It also includes the aspect of reality that recognizes that ordinary sentient beings can become enlightened beings, that reality permits both of those, that when a mind is under the influence of karma and affliction, then rebirths within cyclic existence, which are marked by dissatisfaction, are the only real option. But reality also permits the mind to go beyond that. And when the mind does go beyond that, we just call that enlightenment, or could be also the state of individual liberation is permitted as well. But even, if you understand that there are further advantages of full enlightenment, then, maybe from the beginning you might just be directed toward that. So that this isn't some sort of fabricated or convoluted philosophy that we're trying to convince ourselves of. We're just simply looking at what's true with clear eyes, and then saying, well, of course, given that that's all true, of course, this is the direction that I would move in, and this is what I would also want, not only for myself, but for all other sentient beings. And it's, I think, true that to some degree we can investigate these things and come to some clarity and some resolve without high levels of meditative skill. But there's room for that too. There is, of course, Buddhism would assert that. Here we're talking about sort of two different things. It's definitely true, or two additional different things. So it's definitely true that Buddhism would assert that a sentient being can't achieve enlightenment if they don't develop single-pointed concentration. So to actually achieve enlightenment, of course, single-pointed concentration is necessary. But to understand, to come to a sense of, and to some degree, it depends on what you mean by insight. There are levels. What I mean is that there are levels of insight that we can access without single-pointed concentration. But then there are levels of insight that are still blocked without single-pointed concentration. So, for example, a person isn't likely to have the ability to directly access memories of past lives without single-pointed concentration. And that when a person unlocks that capacity, then what they say is that their confidence in the teachings on karma, in the existence of past and future lives, and so on, becomes firmly unshakable, because that's now their own direct experience, whereas before it wasn't. So there are many reasons why single pointed concentration is either extremely beneficial and then ultimately necessary, um, something that we can't just never develop. We may not develop it in this life, but at least we lay down imprints. We make a certain level of progress, and those karmic imprints would remain in the mind, and that would be beneficial for future lives. Um, so this idea of clear insight, I think, can be understood in different ways. I think it's meant to be understood uh, particularly through the lens of a person who has single pointed concentration. Because in the first sentence of the commentary, um, it says, first, we develop single pointed concentration, which leads us beyond worldly emotional problems and gives us a degree of higher satisfaction. So, Lama Yeshe is just saying, oh, yeah, by the way, you do this. This is a thing you do. But he's describing single pointed concentration. He's describing the ninth level of calm abiding, fully qualified shamatha, something that is not easy. It requires for most people, many years of effort. Requires a minimum, and requires really solitary retreat, for, depends. I mean, people will say different things in terms of what was, you know, what was historically accurate, what maybe seems more likely for Westerners who've um, internalized a very sort of different kind of culture and have to sort of unlearn, um, sort of the instant gratification and the addiction that we have to a faster pace of things. But certainly, a person can't develop single pointed, fully qualified calm abiding in the absence of long retreat. Um, and it's going to be, to some degree different for different people in terms of their own karmic history and so on. You can get to a certain level of calm abiding outside of solitary retreat, but not the ninth level, not fully qualified. Um, but he's just kind of throwing it out there. It's like, oh yeah, let's do that. Let's get single point and concentration. And I think it is true that in the monastery system and in the historical way of thinking about it, it is one of the first things that um, when a person feels like they've maybe finished their academic studies, of course, from the time that they maybe took ordination or what have you as a younger person, of course, they were meditating and of course they were doing retreats and things. But it seems like often it's, calm abiding retreat is the one of the early focuses in that way of thinking, in that kind of historical approach. Well, let me pause here. Any thoughts or questions that have arisen so far?
Hi, Venerable. Very close to the beginning of your talk, you used the word permitted, and I wish I could give you the context, but I can't. And if you can, that's great. It jumped out at me.
It wasn't as it's just sort of my own word. I don't know that it has any special meaning. I just the Buddhist view is that that reality, which we find ourselves in, we find ourselves presently with access to a certain tiny slice of reality. We are embodied in a particular in one world at one point in time, and we have direct subjective access to a tiny, tiny sliver of everything that is. Because Buddhism asserts that that there's the hell realms and the hungry ghost realm and the two desire realm, upper realms, the God and demigod realms, and then the form, and then the formless realms. And that comprises, and then of course you have enlightened, the pure lands that are manifestations of enlightened mind. And all of that together is the totality of all that is. And it wasn't created, it wasn't designed, it wasn't intentionally set in motion. It's just nature. It's just the natural existence of things. And so there are, within that natural order, there are things that are not permitted, for example. And so permitted maybe is I don't know, like you could say the laws of physics, let's say, on in this universe. You could say maybe it's valid to use the word permitted with regard to the laws of physics. Like there are things that would break the laws of physics, and then there are things that are in accordance with the laws of physics. And so you could say that the laws of physics don't permit certain coming, you could think of it, you could imagine it, but it can't be done. It isn't possible, because it would break the fundamental underlying rules that establish nature. So, for example, enlightened mind cannot generate consciousness, cannot create unenlightened individual unenlightened minds. It can't like say, oh, I would like to bring into existence a world populated by this group of ordinary unenlightened beings having a particular experience. Enlightened mind is not capable of that. And so that's something that reality or nature doesn't permit. But moving from a state where our mind is characterized by being under the influence of karma and delusion into the state of enlightenment, that is something that the nature of our mind itself, which is just part of the overall natural world, is capable of. But then when we do that, that mind is still bounded, not by very many things, because of course we can emanate, that mind can emanate and so on, but there are yet still, that mind cannot create unenlightened consciousness. It can't generate world systems and so on. So it's not a creator God in the Christian conception. There are, which is considered. So we can say that enlightened mind is omniscient and omnipotent, meaning that it can know everything that's knowable and it can do everything that can be done. But the idea of creating a world inhabited by ordinary beings and populated, that can't be done. And so it just is an impossibility. So that's just kind of what I meant by permitted, is with reference to whatever the fundamental kind of rules of nature are.
Thanks, that clarified it. I appreciate that.
Okay, so then Lama Yeshe, points out, it goes then now into what's called special insight, which could be also related to, in the quotation, the phrase clear insight. I don't know if, because the phrase, the historical, traditional, technical phrase that's used in relation to calm abiding is special insight, not clear insight. So I don't know if he's meaning those two things. But anyway, so he says a certain amount of darkness remains in our mind, meaning after, because he says it leads us beyond worldly emotional problems and gives us a degree of higher satisfaction. He said that about a person who has developed single pointed concentration. That kind of person finds it very easy to turn away from non-virtue, to concentrate their mind on virtue, because their mind is so powerful. They have this incredibly still, clear, concentrated mind that's available all of the time. And there are benefits to that that just persist in all of their waking and sleeping. Just, it just pervades their existence. They have kind of their mind is a microscope that's at like power 1000, and that's just the nature of their mind now, whereas ours is kind of at like 10 power, and that's the nature of our mind. So that's just the tool that's available to them, and it's very helpful, for many things. But he says even though it's very helpful for many things, in and of itself, it doesn't liberate a person from samsara. People in all kinds of contemplative traditions will lead to single pointed concentration. I'm quite certain that there are many, many practitioners in the Christian mystic traditions, in the Sufi mystic traditions, the Jewish mystic traditions, people who just took a general interest in meditating, in general, and did it consistently for many years. They're all going to develop single pointed concentration because there's nothing Buddhist about it. There's nothing related to Buddhist philosophy or the Buddhist approach or anything unique to the Buddhist inner technology or wisdom that has anything to do with single pointed concentration. So all of those kinds of beings, irrespective of their philosophical system or what they think is true about reality or the soul or what have you, they're all going to benefit in the same way by having developed single pointed concentration. But it doesn't, if that's all you do, it doesn't liberate you from cyclic existence. You have to, as it says here, cultivate penetrative insight, which means to use that tool to actually uncover the nature of reality. You have to direct your mind of single pointed concentration in specific ways to cultivate what they call special insight. So when and you can do this, essentially you would do this on the Lamrim. We can, as an ordinary person without single pointed concentration, we can meditate on all of the topics of the Lamrim, guru devotion, impermanence, death, karma, everything, all of these. And as a person without single pointed concentration, through repetition, and through study and so on, we can reach certain insights. But then, if and when we develop single pointed concentration and we analyze those same topics, because our mind is fundamentally more powerful in a qualitative sense, we would develop special insight into all of those topics. And in particular, we have to use the mind of single pointed concentration on the topic of emptiness, to unlock the subtlest insights that are possible. So, we certainly we can develop, there are levels of insight into, all of the topics that are very beneficial when we have single pointed concentration, and we would have a degree of certainty and a degree of, insight into all of those topics. But in particular, really, the topic of emptiness is something that we unlock in the most important way by using the mind of single pointed concentration. He says the purpose of insight meditation, the experience of emptiness, is realization of non-duality, where the flashing of sense objects and images disappears, and we experience the total unity of absolute reality. There's a difference between the experience of emptiness and its philosophy. Philosophically speaking, he says, sense objects exist, sense pleasures exist, and there's a relationship between the senses and the external world. But in the experience itself, there is no awareness of a duality, no perception of the sense world, and no sense of conflict to irritate the mind. Normally, whenever we perceive objects in the sense world, we see two things. We experience the thing itself and immediately compare it to something else. Society is built on the dualistic mind. So, of course, that he's describing, his own direct experience of single pointed concentration and his own insight into emptiness, which is why, they call emptiness the inexpressible, that which is beyond words, because all of these people who have that experience, they kind of do their best to give us words, but good luck making sense of what they're saying. We have to kind of see it for ourselves. We kind of have to get to that point where we are experiencing that non-duality in our own mind, and then we understand what they're talking about. But until then, it's kind of like, oh, okay, I guess that's probably true. But yeah, this, they say that, the idea of the meditator and the object that's being meditated on dissolves, in the sphere of emptiness, and there's just one experience. There's just, they say it's like water being poured into water. There's no sense of subject and object. It's just one taste, one experience that, when a person, so this is the kind of insight into emptiness that is blocked from us without single pointed concentration. We can, all of us now, we're studying about, emptiness means that things lack inherent existence, and and that, we search for the self, and we come to a sense of non-finding, and we rest in the non-finding, and so on. But still, and that can get a person, over time, with purification and accumulation of merits and so on, that can generate a correct inferential understanding of emptiness, where our understanding is accurate, but it depends still on the conceptual mind. It depends still on the use of concepts. But it isn't a direct, non-conceptual realization of emptiness. And that's ultimately what we have to move to, beyond even a correct inferential understanding. We have to generate a correct non-conceptual understanding. And single-pointed concentration is necessary to get to that point. And then it becomes not just insight, but special insight, the insight that's generated when a practitioner, a meditator, cultivates single-pointed concentration and directs their mind of single-pointed concentration on their understanding of emptiness. And eventually it progresses into something that isn't conceptual, that no longer depends on the use of thought and the conceptual mind. But that kind of experience is beyond us at this point.
Venerable, you've said several times in the past that, and I think you've said our arhats have the capability of single-pointed concentration. Are they moving into special insight, or is that only if they have the Mahayana attitude of bodhicitta.
No, so certainly the emptiness that an arhat realizes is the same emptiness that a practitioner of the Mahayana realizes. So the only thing that distinguishes a practitioner of the Mahayana is bodhicitta, is joining their, so they're not practicing for their own, their motivation is different. They are practicing, and then of course, beyond, and then of course, you have the Vajrayana teachings, which are not included in this book. They're not included in the sutra material, and they're understood to also be necessary. It's understood that you can't actually only rely on the sutra teachings to achieve full enlightenment. You use the sutra teachings to become qualified to practice the Vajrayana teachings, and that ultimately becomes a necessary supplemental addition to the overall process of achieving enlightenment. But without bodhicitta, the Vajrayana teachings have no power. They're just a technique that still depends on the bodhicitta motivation that you develop on the sutra path. So like I said, you become a suitable vessel for Vajrayana by mastering the sutra path. But yeah, the only thing that distinguishes a Mahayana practitioner from a Theravadan practitioner is the Theravadan practitioner is seeking individual liberation. They are seeking to realize emptiness only for their own exit out of cyclic existence, whereas the Mahayana practitioner has this wide motivation of wishing to achieve full enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. But the emptiness is the same, and the single pointed concentration is the same.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts or questions? So if we go on to day 335, the quotation is, having attained bodhicitta, a new bodhisattva practices the six perfections and the four means of drawing disciples to the Dharma. And so that the four means of drawing or gathering disciples is the emphasis of day 335, which is why I mentioned before that this subsection is called the practices of a bodhisattva rather than just called the six perfections, because it includes also the four means of gathering disciples. So then he says the six perfections are a means of ripening our own mind, and there are four additional bodhisattva practices called the four means of gathering disciples, which are a means of ripening the minds of others. So this is part of what a person, a bodhisattva, is going to want to do, want to be interested in accomplishing. Because again, the bodhisattva path is not a path that is being engaged in for one's own benefit. It's being engaged in for the benefit of others. And then it says, although, quote, disciples is an accurate translation, using this term makes the meaning a little limited. It actually refers to drawing all sentient beings to the Dharma, influencing them so that we can reveal the Dharma to them and lead them to a better future rebirth, liberation, and enlightenment. So bodhisattvas are interested in shaping society, shaping culture, working in these So if you look at, the life of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, or the life of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, these great bodhisattvas, these great masters, that's what they did. They didn't just, think about, like, oh, I need to practice ethics and generosity. They thought, oh, I need to teach. I need to establish, places of learning. I need to create holy objects that can help to, ripen the minds of sentient beings. I need to create these sort of cultural beacons throughout all of these societies, to give touchstones for sentient beings to meet the Dharma, to have these opportunities. That's part of what it means to practice the Bodhisattva path. It's not just going off and not engaging in society and ripening one's own, or just, working within a monastery or within a nunnery, or it's, really about making oneself available to society, and doing what one can, given, of course, not every bodhisattva, you know, is exactly, has exactly the same opportunities, and exactly the same, there's not an infinite number. Of course, there's many bodhisattvas on the planet who don't have the same exact karmic ripening to do those incredible, global kinds of things. But still, within whatever sphere of influence they may have, they are trying to contribute to local, you know, monasteries and nunneries and centers, and do what's within their means to help establish causes and conditions for sentient beings to be led into the Dharma. So then there are practices that are part of this interest that bodhisattvas have in gathering disciples. He says the first of these is giving, which means giving material things to those who are not yet receptacles for the Dharma. He says, before we can introduce people to the Dharma, we first make them happy by offering whatever material things they need, such as food and clothes. So this is, trying to, in a way, kind of trying to show, to attract. So when it says to gather disciples, it also kind of means to present yourself in an attractive way to society, to people, and so one way that bodhisattvas would do that is to, help sentient beings in a material way. So of course, like FPMT has many different services and projects related to health and related to sheltering people and providing medical care, and those people tangentially, would say, oh, this is a project of a Buddhist organization, and then maybe they might investigate, they might be interested, they might say, oh, well, that's really kind, that's really, how wonderful that they're motivated in that way, and that might help them to investigate further, like, oh, they benefited me in this way. So this could be a sentient being that isn't, as it says, isn't a receptacle yet for the actual teachings, but because they saw, maybe that there was some compassionate response to a natural disaster, or a need, for healthcare or so on, and they saw that that was sponsored by a monastery or an organization, they might be like, oh, maybe I should, see what that's about, and then that can help them to, if they have the karma, to help them be attracted to that. The second is speaking kind words, which means, as it says here, which means talking to people in an appropriate way, which pleases them. So again, you try to make sentient beings happy by with your words. And again, this isn't what's important here is that this topic is, as it says, how bodhisattvas are relating to sentient beings who are not receptacles of the Dharma. So it doesn't mean that they are treating like their own students in the same way. This is about you know pleasing the minds of sentient beings. And then, of course, when a person is a receptacle for the Dharma and they've come under the the influence of a teacher, then that teacher might speak to them in a more direct way. So, they say that like when a person is quite new, and they meet a teacher, and they're kind of just, they're going, that teacher might give, as it says here, might give gifts, might come, I know that I, just having been at centers, and teachers are traveling, they travel with like a bag of gifts, like that's really common. And I have now I'm just collecting. I have two bags, and a shawl, a wool, from teachers who are, and my four. I have four, and my lower robes. That so I have four. These teachers, they just travel with things, and even like directors, and and they just give them out. Um, so it's quite common. It's a cultural kind of thing. And then, so one thing that they say is that like if you're creating a relationship with a specific teacher, and they start out kind of, they're kind of starting out like this, right? Because they don't know you, they don't know, and they're trying to hook you, right? They're trying to make you someone who's a receptacle for the teachings by engaging in this kind of activity. And then they say, well, at a certain point, if you develop a longer term relationship with them, they might stop doing this. And that's a good sign. It should be considered to be a good sign when they feel comfortable speaking more directly, when they feel comfortable guiding you in, being like, hey, this kind of behavior is problematic, cut it out, or, which they're not going to just say that when they first meet you. They're trying to ripen your mind. They're trying to get you to a place where you can hear that stronger statement and not be scared away, not, where you now have in your own mind the dedication. You've become a receptacle for the Dharma. So you should take it as a good sign if, like when you would go to visit your teacher, they would do nice things, and then they're kind of like, okay, well, now we can just get to work. Now we're done with that because you've matured, and now I know you can handle, just hearing what I have to say. And then it says teaching to the third is teaching to the level of the student. So speaking kind words, and then teaching, speaking to the level of the student. And he says this means that when we explain Dharma, we do so in a way that is entirely relevant to the person that we are talking to. So tailoring, maybe if you're talking to a child or you're talking to someone who's not, ready for, and of course, we're talking about bodhisattvas here, so they're quite advanced, and they can kind of tailor their things to the needs of, just like, of course, the Buddha was doing this in a perfect way because he was omniscient and so on, and bodhisattvas aren't doing it to that level, but doing one's best to tailor what the message that you're bringing to the level of the student. And then the fourth means of gathering disciples is practicing what we teach. Just as we explain the Dharma to others, showing how they can make their life most meaningful, we too live like that. We encourage them to live in the Dharma, and they can see that we ourselves are doing exactly that. Unless we live in the practice, we cannot be an example or inspiration for others, and then there's no result in the mind, no peace of mind. Any thoughts or questions on the four means of gathering disciples?
It's just kind of a practical question, but is there any, is it okay to give a gift forward to someone that has been given to you by a Dharma practitioner? I mean, and for that purpose, you recognize that someone would be receptive to that, and it's an opportunity, and the time is right.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that is a little bit tricky, to keep it is that, like, whether the person that gave it to you might find out, and if that might disturb their mind, that could be a consideration. Because, sometimes, and like I mentioned before, Lama Zopa would do exactly, that, as I was describing. But he was doing it in relation to his students and showing them not to be attached to the gifts that they gave him, by giving it away to other people. But they were his students, and he was, maybe he felt comfortable. So it could just, if a person might feel disrespected or might feel like, oh, I meant that, I meant that for you. I wanted you. Because, and again, that is an attached way that they are thinking about it, and their mind shouldn't be disturbed. They should rejoice that maybe there was a better circumstance came along, that where there was more benefit for it to be used in that way. But I do think maybe we need to think about that they're not at that level. Maybe their mind would be disturbed because they did give it in kind of that attached way, wanting to please specifically you, and you're like, oh well, but I see this greater benefit. That's the only thing I would kind of, as a calculus, as something to keep in mind. Like, could it be, if that couldn't happen, then absolutely, like, it belongs to you now. And if you think, if using your judgment, you see a greater purpose, then absolutely you should offer it for that greater purpose. I just think it's a consideration to maybe also think about, could it backfire in a way because the person who gave it isn't, is a bit attached, as a bit of sort of an emotional attachment. Okay, so then the last contemplation for today, it'll be day 336, where Lama Zopa says, without keeping the bodhisattva vows, enlightenment is impossible. So again, as I mentioned, what distinguishes a Theravada practitioner from a Mahayana practitioner is bodhicitta. And here, this is kind of getting at the difference between aspiring bodhicitta and engaged bodhicitta. So the difference between aspiring bodhicitta and engaged bodhicitta really is whether or not the practitioner has taken and is upholding the bodhisattva vows. So there's a ceremony, where you can go. It's offered from time to time. We offer it here. We have offered it here a few times, and over the, and we will continue, from time to time to offer it. So when a person takes the bodhisattva vows, of course, that doesn't mean, of course, maybe historically speaking, I'm not sure, historically speaking, maybe, you know, it certainly can be that a person can generate bodhicitta without the uh, without formally taking the bodhisattva vows like in a ceremony. But I mean, the bodhisattva vows are pretty, pretty for the most part, like um, they're expressing ideas that are not like out there, they're not like really bizarre. They're kind of expressing relatively pretty common sense. They're kind of codifying a pretty reasonable common sense way of um, upholding the kind of mind, the mind of a person who has bodhicitta. Like, and so what I think what Lama Zopa is saying is that whether a person has like formally taken the vows or not, the vows are just expressing sort of a pretty sensible way of what you would be doing if you were really taking the mind of bodhicitta seriously. And so formally taking the ceremony is kind of, you can read the bodhisattva vows, you can study them, you can memorize them. It helps you to kind of keep them at the front of your mind to check. It's a way of checking your behavior against, this kind of formal list of the root and the secondary vows and so on. But it isn't like any of them are like super strange or out there or like something that you wouldn't necessarily like, oh, I wouldn't have ever thought that like I shouldn't destroy a town if I care about sentient beings. Like, I mean, it's reasonable. Like, you wouldn't go out and destroy cities if you're a bodhisattva. So, but if you are destroying cities, you're probably not a bodhisattva. Like, you can't really say, I have this mind of enlightenment if you're going out and, creating havoc in certain. So, they're not a set of precepts that are wildly um, kind of divorced from what the idea of wanting to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings would otherwise be doing that. Um, so, so he says first we take. So this is again kind of getting at that. Although a person can by mastering the small scope, mastering the middle scope, and then contemplating, as we've talked about, the 7-point cause and effect meditation, or the equalizing and exchanging self for others, they can give rise to the mind of enlightenment, the bodhicitta motivation. They really would. It would make sense. It would be reasonable, and it is very common sense to undertake the training of the bodhisattva vows as a way of protecting and motivating and guiding oneself toward having a really, really stable, because bodhicitta, as we know, we have to get to a point where it isn't just something that arises through effort. You can, as I said, you can master the small scope, you can master the middle scope, and then you can meditate on bodhicitta, and you can have these experiences of bodhicitta. But you want to get to a point where it becomes your baseline state, where it becomes so deeply internalized and integrated that it's spontaneous and it's uncontrived. So as a vehicle for accomplishing that, the bodhisattva vows are really critical. A person wouldn't be satisfied with just sort of meditating on bodhicitta. They would really utilize this vehicle as a method for getting to a point where, in addition, in combination with the meditations on 7 point and equalizing and exchanging, they would hold their conduct within the vows of a bodhisattva as well, as a vehicle for extremely deeply internalizing it. So he says, first we take the wishing vow, where we generate the aspiration to attain enlightenment. Then we take the entering vow or engaging vow, where we vow to actively engage in the bodhisattva's activities, the six perfections. Keeping these vows, our path to enlightenment is assured, but if we break them, we create great obstacles to our path. For example, he says, if we live in a lawless country where people refuse to obey the laws and steal and kill for their own ends, no matter how many police there are, life is dangerous and terrible. Society needs laws and people have to follow them. Similarly, it is vital for aspiring bodhisattvas to take and keep the bodhisattva vows. By living in the vows and working tirelessly to attain bodhicitta and enlightenment, we are doing the most beneficial thing we can, actively liberating countless sentient beings and leading them to enlightenment. Aspirational bodhicitta is the spontaneous, uncontrived bodhicitta becomes before actually taking the bodhisattva vows and engaging in the activities of a bodhisattva, at which stage it becomes engaging bodhicitta. So I kind of alluded to, as I say, a person can, you don't have to use the bodhisattva vows to develop bodhicitta. You can develop it first and then take the bodhisattva vows, and maybe historically that was quite common, but it's also true that the bodhisattva vows are now kind of like, in a way, maybe like the tantric vows. Before, they were only given to very, very small groups of disciples who were 100% totally ready to completely make use of that vehicle. Now the bodhisattva vows are offered regularly all over the place to any, to any. Of course, you have to consider yourself Buddhist, you have to have taken refuge and so on. So there are some prerequisites, but it isn't the case that like you have to be like, oh well, but I don't have an uncontrived bodhicitta, and therefore I can't take the bodhisattva vows. That's not true. You certainly can take them at any point, if you are on the Mahayana path. But it's just to say that you're moving from, yes, well, it depends. A person could have be a real bodhisattva through doing those things, but then not yet having taken the vows, they're not kind of really fully protecting them. They're that bodhicitta might degenerate. It's true, maybe they have uncontrived bodhicitta, but that's still subject to degeneration. It's not fully, they're up until a certain point on the bodhisattva grounds, your bodhicitta can fall back. You can lose your bodhicitta. So it's a little bit, complicated, and there are different scenarios in which it might come into play. For us now in the 21st century, certainly we have access to the bodhisattva vows, and we can take them, and we can try our best to implement them and use them as a guiding force in our lives, even though we don't have any kind of bodhicitta, realization of any strength, of any real importance. But what's critical to understand, I think, is that it's a vehicle. The vows are a vehicle for really protecting, really deepening the vows, and making sure that they don't, really protecting it and deepening bodhicitta, and making sure that it doesn't degenerate, making sure that, by living in the vows, by upholding the vows, that even if you do have, to some degree, some real genuine bodhicitta, that it only gets stronger and stronger and stronger, and you don't get to a point where you give up your bodhicitta, where it falls back down, where it degenerates, where it ceases, because that can certainly happen. A person can get overwhelmed by the demands of being a bodhisattva, by seeing the harm of sentient beings, and they can give up. It might not be as stable, as firm, even though it's genuine. It may not have yet become unshakable. And the vows are kind of how you move from genuine to unshakable bodhicitta, where there isn't any danger. You've progressed beyond any danger of giving up sentient beings. Okay, we're out of time. Any final thoughts or questions? Fine, if you have I don't mind. I'm not saying you can't ask a question because it's 6:30. We're not gonna address another contemplation for today, but nope. All right. So we'll end with dedication. So we bring to mind our altruistic motivation and think that by having engaged in the class, we've actualized that motivation, which has generated positive energy in the mind. And that positive energy will ripen in beneficial ways in the future. So think about how you yourself are wishing to offer the fruit of your practice for the benefit of your own spiritual growth and development and the spiritual benefit of other sentient beings. All right. So, and so we're off, I believe, all of next week, sadly, because there's the puja on Monday that I didn't want to overlap with, and then we've got Thanksgiving. So, all right, we'll be off next week. But we will come back to it. Take care.